How about, oh, this one works. Okay, I won't repeat everything I've said before, but you're welcome to talk to me afterwards if you didn't get it. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If in the event of, in the event of a fire or an emergency, we have two exits. One is here where you came in. The other one is there in the back. If you go out the back, please go out to your left, the door. Do not go down the stairs. That would trap you. Back there is also where the toilets are. And within the room back here, we have nibbles and water for you as a refreshment, either now or after the event. A big thank you to Bike Auckland, who support us tonight and have done a lot to help that event to come along and be here. Bike Auckland is also live streaming this event. So if the camera is on the panelists, so you don't have to worry about being online tonight. But if you participate in the discussion afterwards and you don't want your name in the live stream, just ask your question and don't identify yourself. That's all that's probably important for you. I have two apologies for tonight. One is from Christine Fletcher, who we had asked to be on the panel, but who can't come for health reasons, and one from Christina Robertson, who is one of our local board members. But we have local board members here in attendance, and that is fantastic. Thank you for being here, Jack. As a general rule for tonight, please all show respect for each other, for one another. We want to be able to talk open and honest, but with respect, because we all need to participate in our road network. We all need to get from A to B. And to bring that home, I want to say I want to open the discussion with karakia that goes in that direction as well. Kia hora te marina, kia whakapapapau nāmu te moana. Hei huarahi ma tātou i te rangi nei, tātou i a tātou, aroha atu, aroha mai, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. May love be widespread, may the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all today, with respect for each other, for one another. Unite. Now coming to our panelists of this evening. Next to me, Julie Fairey, who might be known to a lot of you as one of the Albert-Eden councillors. And I read a bit of a bio for each of our panelists. Don't have it all by heart. So Julie is a dedicated councillor of the Albert-Eden-Puketāpapa ward in Auckland, having been elected to the position in 2022. Julie has been a local board member for over a decade, where she has gained extensive experience working with the community to address their needs and concerns, and I know has been on the chair of the local board as well for some of that time. Originally from the North Shore, Julie is a strong advocate for action on climate change. Julie is also passionate about improving decision-making processes to help communities create real impact. She also believes that everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to call home, and that the compact city model can help achieve this goal while also reducing carbon emissions. Julie believes that a city is about sharing. It's a place where people live together and share resources to make things better. We can help with that, and we can lead by example too. Thank you, Julie. Welcome. Next to Julie is John Watson, also a councillor with with Auckland Council. John is a prominent figure in Auckland's local government, serving as the Albany Ward Councillor and Chair of Transport and Infrastructure Committee of Auckland Council. Among people in the council, John is known for keeping them honest, making his community top priority, and holding the mayor and council-controlled organisations accountable. He is seeking to advance environmental protection and water quality with a practical and timely climate change action approach. As the chairperson of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee, he is dedicated to improving projects across roading, including motorways, busways and cycleways, public transport and wastewater. Welcome, John. At the end of the row is Adrian Lord. Adrian is the head of cycling at Auckland Transport. He arrived in New Zealand in July 2022 following a 25-year career as transport consultant specialising in cycling and walking. He worked with the Olympic medalist Chris Boardman to help advocate for better conditions and funding for cycling in the UK. He has developed cycling strategies, network plans and route designs for many towns and cities in the UK and elsewhere, and has authored several design guidance documents. Welcome, Adrian. And last but not least, our moderator tonight is Matt Fordham. Matt co-leads Bike Point Chef, a community advocacy and activation group that has delivered a range of programs to enable and encourage young children to bike safely around their neighborhood. Bike Point Chef was heavily involved during the co-design and consultation phases of the proposed Point Chef Cycleway project, working closely with AT and impacted businesses to ensure the needs of all street users were met. Matt is also the founder and director of Crank, a consultancy that supports cycleway projects across Auckland. Crank's work on these projects includes facilitating conversations between people who advocate for cycleways with those who are concerned about the change, to help steer projects to meet the needs of everyone. And I think that's a perfect match for this discussion tonight. Thank you, Matt, for being here, and I hand over to you with that.
Do we just want to test that both mics are working?
Testing, 2, 1, 2, yeah.
Welcome everyone, and thank you Ricky, Pascal and the crew from Gribblehurst. It's been a lot of fun working with people getting this event together, and the Bike Auckland group as well. We're all quite passionate about getting people safely around our city. We're all volunteers for tonight's event. I'd love to be with my son who's gone to his first disco tonight, but I'll pick him up later, I hope. So yeah, we're all here because we're really committed to this stuff, but I'm sure that many of you are as well. And there'll be people in the audience who are strong advocates and proponents for increased cycling infrastructure in the city, but there'll also be people that are concerned about it. And tonight's really about how can we listen to each other a little bit better. How tonight's going to run is, I'll give a little bit of framing for the conversation. I'm trying not to talk for too long, and then the panellists and I will have a conversation for probably about an hour, and we're saving some time, about 15 minutes at the end, for questions. The questions for tonight, we'd love to hear questions that are on topic, which is, and I'll explain the topic in a minute. If you are going to ask questions, we're really keen to kind of flip questions back on people asking questions too. So this is about people reflecting on how they've come to their views, how other people have come to their views, so be prepared for that if you do ask a question. So what are we here for? What did we call this event again? Let's talk about how we talk about cycling. There are a lot of barriers to rolling out more and better cycling infrastructure in this city, a huge amount. At a city level, we need to have strategic alignment, we need to have funding, we need to have capacity in the sector to actually deliver it. A lot of these barriers aren't so much there anymore. We've got really well-aligned strategic plans. There's funding on the table to deliver things, and the sector is, I think, in my view, and I'm sure many people will agree, we've got more than enough capacity to actually build what's required. But city-level planning is not enough. We also need a lot of barriers on the ground to be overcome. So it's not enough just to build things, they need to be used. That's a little bit of an area that I've been involved with over the last few years in our local community group, Bike Point Chev, where we've done a lot of work to try and get young kids cycling safely. So we work with kids as young as 4. We're doing bike skills training, bike safety training. That's just one example of many community groups around the city now who have kind of emerged from, isolated, unsupported bike champions to now where we have an actually fledgling network across the whole city of community groups that are overcoming these barriers together with the support of each other. So it feels like some of those kind of local barriers are also kind of being overcome, but we're still really not seeing the progress despite all of these barriers not being as big as they probably were 10 years ago. A lot of projects still get stalled. Our project in Point Chev's gone through a few stalls and we're kind of keep working on that. A lot of advocates would say that even those projects that are going forward aren't going forward fast enough. So what might that be? And that's what tonight's conversation is about. We've been talking about this over the last few weeks. We think that one of the barriers that's currently existing to actually moving things forward is the divisiveness around this topic. It's a really fraught issue. A couple of years ago, Bernard Hickey wrote something that said maybe cycleways the new political fault line in New Zealand. Not sure if that's still relevant now, but we do see all over the place really divisive rhetoric on this. And that's from social media to traditional media, on the street and some of the engagement events I'm involved with, maybe in some of the discourse between yourselves and jobs you have or neighbours, friends, family. It's a really fraught topic. And a lot of that fraughtness is because we're not really listening to each other or engaging with one another. We're kind of talking past each other and thinking that if we just say the right thing, the other person's going to hear us and change their mind. So tonight's really about, well, how can we change how we talk about cycling? Might that help overcome some of that divisiveness that might be slowing down progress on this subject? And I just want to give a couple of examples to kind of highlight what I'm talking about here. And these are 2 personal examples. They're really messy, they're not perfect, but just some of the stuff that I've had as a cycling advocate that's learnt how listening to other people can actually help kind of move things forward. One is from the consultation of the Point Chev Cycleway project, which I was involved in the co-design for that as a member of Bike Point Chev and a member of the local community years ago. Other people, local businesses, schools, community leaders were there as well. And when it came to the consultation of that collaboratively designed scheme, I had this distinct recollection of someone walking up to me and not swearing at me, but swearing about the project in the local town square in front of my child. And they were just full of heat and animosity and just so frustrated. And they hadn't even made it to see the maps for the proposal. The idea of a cycleway was just generating so much friction for that person. And it was a very, very tense situation. I ended up walking over to the maps with her and introduced her to one of my friends, one of our team in Bike Point Chev, and we just sat there with her and just had a chat for about 10 minutes about the scheme, and things were still getting pretty fraught. Actually had to take turns talking because there was so much heat in there, so my friend and I were kind of subbing in and subbing out. And I ended up walking over the road and grabbing some cups of coffee and brought them back. And the half-hour conversation after that, where we actually sat down and stopped trying to talk at each other and past each other and actually listened to what each other was saying, was one of the most kind of productive things for me personally to learn about. There are real fears out there for people for change. There are real fears for people who have businesses in these areas or homes in these communities. It's not something that is an abstract theory for people. It's a real tangible fear. And sitting down and listening to that detail enabled us over the coming weeks to actually work with them and with Auckland Transport to kind of find solutions to the needs that they had for that scheme. And that scheme ended up being a streetscape scheme that met lots of needs, not just a cycleway project, as I'm sure many of you know. The other example is in the work that we do in my company. We're involved in cycleway projects, and we worked on a project last year where a scheme had been introduced to a community that received really mixed feedback during consultation. It did not kind of there wasn't the confidence to proceed, and community members within that group asked for a more collaborative approach to designing the project. And so my team and other people, lots of other people actually worked on that project, but in trying to set up a collaborative kind of environment for people to work on that project, we deliberately sought out those people who were most concerned about that change and those people that were most kind of supportive of it. It was a really interesting process. We went as far as trying to almost do like a wedding seating plan of ensuring that in the workshops and rooms like this, we had people sitting next to each other that had very opposing views, because we thought the power of people actually getting to sit down for hour after hour over 4 workshops and learn a little bit about each other might get us forward to some kind of shared understanding. And it was, that project has still kind of got a long way to go, but it was a really productive exercise in seeing how the advocates for that and the people most concerned could actually sit down and listen to the fears that each other had. And a lot of the rhetoric, especially inflamed rhetoric we kind of hear, comes from that fear, both people advocating for cycleways who are fearful for their safety, and people that are fearful of change who might be losing a business opportunity or some kind of space that they've been using for something else in the past. So that's what tonight's about, is kind of thinking of some examples about that. How can we kind of better get people listening to each other? And it's a concept we wanted to kind of bring to the fore before we start the conversation is one of dialogue. And this kind of subject of how we talk about cycling, currently maybe talking past each other or at each other. Dialogue is a very different thing. Dialogue is conversations to solve problems by sharing ideas. And it is very much a listening and learning process. I'm a huge cycling advocate. I've got 5.5 bikes, so I share one with my partner. But I also have a car that I really like driving, a caravan. Don't really catch public transport, but I have lots of Uber deliveries to our house when I can't cook for the kids. But I kind of say that to kind of say I'm a cycling advocate, but I'm fearful of being cancelled for what I'm about to say by my own community of cycling advocates, and that I think that some of the people that have the most to learn from this kind of topic are cycling advocates themselves. So we're not pitching this as we're here to learn about the perfect words, the perfect memes, the perfect video to share to convince someone. We're really talking about sitting down and learning and listening to other people. And a really key component of that is questioning your own beliefs and your views and how did you come to them. And it's as equal for us as cycling advocates as people that might be concerned. We're really lucky tonight to have 3 people. We've had a little bit of a chat before tonight's session about could we stray into that space? Could we actually query our own views and where those have come from? What are the events, experiences, mentors, people that have shaped our views? Where do we get the information that forms them? And how have we engaged with people that might have a different view to us? So, it was a big rant, wasn't it? I think I got it all out. I wrote a speech, I don't normally do that. Yeah, I do feel a bit better actually. It's been a stressful day. So, frame the conversation, how we talk about cycling. I'd love to once again welcome the 2 councillors who have made time for us tonight, and Adrian. I think it's going to be a really fun, exploratory conversation. I'm really looking forward to see how it goes and looking forward to your questions at 8:15, I think. Ready? Not really. Section 1 on my page, the importance of dialogue. What we would like to do is just start by asking each of you to explain in your role, how important is it to have dialogue and the people that you engage with? And also, what is your role in terms of seeking out, hearing and responding to contrasting views? How does that play out in your job that you do as part of working on transport in this city? And I'd love to, because it's easy, give the microphone to Adrian next to me to go first.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely vital, obviously, in my job, because we are trying to cater for everybody, all road users. And it is never just a cycling scheme, particularly when you are reallocating road space. You've still got to accommodate the buses. People have still got to have deliveries to their businesses. Customers have still got to get to businesses that are at the side of the road, and so on and so forth. So we always try to kind of take into account all of the different viewpoints and all of the opportunities and constraints that we encounter. I think one of the things that we sometimes do badly is we assume certain issues, like, we always assume that parking is about customers, but actually, by and large, it's usually about the business owners and their staff and so on. It's equally important that they've got somewhere to park and so on. So we sometimes get it a bit wrong, and I'm not talking just about AT, this is my industry experience, is that sometimes we assume that what is a problem on the face of it is actually the cause, and there might be a different root cause behind some of the opposition. So that dialogue is really, really important, not just on a sort of superficial basis, to actually drill down and find out what the underlying issues are.
I'd be interested, because I'm sure everyone's familiar with consultation processes where people send in feedback and have your say forms and call centres and stuff with Auckland Transport, but what other types of forums are you in where you're either hearing feedback from people with opposing views or deliberately trying to seek it out?
So through the consultation process where people give their feedback, there is quite often an opportunity then to go out and talk to individual businesses and so on to understand more about what it is that they're trying to achieve, what it is about their scheme that they don't like, and how we can address that. So, that might be through a parking strategy, it might be through relocation of certain elements of the scheme so that they're not so badly affected and so on. So there is usually a way. It costs money, and we don't always have the money. And so there is then a conversation about, well, yes, that is theoretically possible, but not within our budget. And, so we have to then sort of make a decision about, how we go with that information. But there is always the opportunity to kind of go back, say, you said this, we've heard what you say, this is our potential solution, and, open up that dialogue. And it's time consuming to do that, but what I've found through my career is the more time you invest up front, the easier it is further down the line when you come to deliver. And the worst thing that happens is if you don't invest that time, and there's always pressure to do something quick and cheap, then it all goes wrong at the last minute and the scheme gets pulled. And so it's time well spent as well to actually actively seek out the opposition and try and open up that dialogue.
Thank you. And Councillor Watson, who said I'm allowed to call him John, thank you. I wonder if you could do the same, just let us know what kind of forums are you in where you're hearing from people, and if you thought it was relevant, maybe the Transport Committee, for example, or some of the Upper Harbour experiences that you've had might be relevant here.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Is that okay? Can you hear me all right? Just a little bit of disclaimer with that lovely introduction. I recognise parts of that from my election brochure where you say how great you are in the third person. Okay. So I guess the job of elected people, you're meant to listen to people, right? It's meant to be a job. But you often find that most people have quite defined opinions on all manner of things, and they spell them out there in black and white. And a large percentage of people then proceed to keep to those things. And I'm probably as guilty of that as the next one. But certainly what Matt said about listening to people really resonates, and particularly on this issue, because I guess one of the reasons I came here tonight when I got contacted by Ricky was that the whole cycleway kind of antagonism is just ridiculous, really. If you step back and think about it, it's ridiculous that an issue such as that engenders such vitriol, and I've experienced it quite recently in my own ward, and some of you may well have heard about it, is the Upper Harbour Drive cycleway. I don't know if you've heard of that. I've certainly heard about it because it's been dominated things for the best part of over in a year, and it was a good example of rushing in and not listening to people, in fact not even asking people, and ending up with a real disaster on both sides. And the kind of thing with this one was that some of the strongest opponents of the cycleway that was rolled out were cyclists, and local cyclists. So you had a situation where for whatever reason, Auckland Transport probably looking to do things quickly and saw this as a strategic link. They just rocked in there and rolled out all these big concrete barriers, which they have around the city. And I know coming here today that you have coming down to Kingsland, that work perfectly fine there, in slower speed environments. But this Upper Harbour Drive is a place that's 70 kilometres an hour. It's very narrow in places, and it had just those kind of undulating bends that you only have to lose your concentration for a bit, and you're into these barriers. And there was about 38 crashes within a couple of months, and some of them very bad crashes where people were carrying across the road and cars catching fire and all the rest of it. So it basically incited a whole community, the Green Hive community, which has quite a lot of people who cycle, because they saw the way this was rolled out. They hadn't been asked. There's people, writing off their cars left, right and centre. And it wasn't just all, idiot drivers. It was needed just a momentary lack of concentration, and you can clip these things, and, it's a 70 kilometre an hour area. So, you're in trouble. And to add sort of grist to the mill was that a number of cyclists, particularly the more serious cyclists, they liked the cycleway as it was, which wasn't separated with the concrete separators. Anyway, cut a long story short, what is a perfect example of really not listening to people, and it caught me out by surprise, because often, you often think if you're a politician and something happens in your ward, that's a good thing, right? Because money's coming to your area and there's people who are going to benefit of it. Not in this case. It wasn't like that at all. It was, it was fraud. It just ignited everyone. So, I guess without labouring it too much, is a good example. As a lot of the cycleway debate is of just stepping back and listening to people. And after talking to Matt the last time when we had this sort of pre-run through thing, I realised that my view of cycling, which is quite informed, like most people, where I live and what I've been doing all my life, because I've been cycling all my life since the 1960s. The greatest present you could get when I was a kid was a bike. That was just like... That was it, I can remember my first bike, my blue bike. I used to ride it around in our house. And then after that, you didn't get a new bike because bikes were very expensive. You had to get second-hand bikes after you got your first bike. And in those days, certainly there were less cars on the road, and it was a bit safer. But there are a lot of people who spent pretty much their whole life on bikes in one way or other. And I've kind of had a bit of a resurgence recently, because I use my bike to get to the ferry because the roads are so bad. So, but what Matt said is, that was my experience, and then I thought of my own kids, and their experience of bike totally different than mine. So in some ways, although I'm a lot older, I'm a lot more daring and experienced and carefree than them. I wouldn't let them out going the ways that I go, because I know they're not experienced. They haven't done much cycling. They've never been avid cyclists, even though they're quite sporty. So my view of cycling has been pretty much determined by my experience. But that's me, not everyone else. So I need to listen to people and learn out more.
Thanks, John. And Julie, same question for you. So in your job, how do you hear from people on different sides of this debate?
Often is the answer, is the short answer. But, thinking about the aspect around dialogue and my background before local government work is I worked in the union movement. And so quite often you were representing someone who had a problem, and you really needed to understand what the actual problem was, because sometimes it wasn't the problem that first presented itself. You know, they might ring you because their pay had been calculated incorrectly or whatever. But then once you started talking to them, you actually discovered they're on an illegal fixed term contract, or actually they were they were being treated badly at work. And often in that union context where you're negotiating, you often are needing to identify also what are the underlying interests here. You know, what are you actually trying to achieve? And so there is a lot of that in the local government work where you need to understand, and often, you know, like you pointed to, Adrian, often the first thing that people will say is, we're going to lose our parking. But once you actually work that through and say, well, hang on, you're going to have all this parking just around the corner, and things change and evolve, and you discover that there are other concerns. It was just like actually when we were trying to get people to join the union, people would always, the first thing they'd say is, I can't afford it. And then you'd sort of sit down and work out with them, and then it would be, you would then get, this is my actual objection to joining the union. So you had to keep asking, you had to keep talking, and you had to be open to listening as well. And so a tool that I've found quite useful over the years, I don't always use it as much as I should, is to reflect back to someone what I think I've heard them say. And quite often I'll discover that what I think I heard them say and what they think they told me, whether I've got it right or they've got it right, doesn't really matter, because we haven't made that connection, right? So often reflecting back to someone, you know, so if I'm having a meeting with a constituent who's worried about something, and I'll take some notes, and at the end I'll say, okay, this is what I've heard are your key issues. And often they'll say, well, actually you've missed this one, you know, or actually I don't care so much about that one now that we've talked about it, but this one is really important to me. So it's that checking in process. And you know, it's really interesting to take part in a conversation about dialogue, having just come from a day-long committee meeting, because I think at the table we do talk past each other a lot. We kind of say what we've prepared to say, and we don't necessarily engage with each other's points a lot. So I'm hoping this will be a useful conversation for that part of my job too. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. I'm quite interested from John and Julie, as a community advocate that's been fighting for a project in my community for many years. I've had long, nuanced conversations on the side of the street or in collaborative design sessions with professionals and people from Auckland Transport. But the opportunity to come and speak to elected members such as yourselves, we often get given 5 minutes to pitch what for us has been 7 years of work. And we might have 3 questions asked. And I'm just like, the stuff you've described, Julie, is very, you know, that takes time to ask those questions and reflect on where people are coming from. I'm just wondering, do you have the opportunities to actually get out there and have those more nuanced conversations, or is it from the public's point of view that the decisions are largely made based on what's presented in those kind of 5-minute slots to people?
I think it's fair to say that we all bring a lot of other baggage to the table than the suitcases that are unpacked in front of us, if we put it that way. And so a lot of the work happens before you get to the table. And that was my experience as a local board member too, is that often we would have a workshop, often there would have been a consultation process, members, elected members engage in those sort of as to a level they wish to. So we've just recently, for example, had Have Your Say meetings on the budget. I've gone to the 2 held by the local boards in my area, but I didn't get to talk to everybody who was there. And in fact, one person I rocked up to and said, I think you've been waiting to talk to me, turned out to be a council staff member who was there to answer other people's questions. But it was okay because he didn't recognise me either, so it was okay. But, you know, when we are making decisions based on advice and based on what's put before us, but we do bring our own due diligence and our own research. So in that way, it differs a little bit from, say, a jury in a trial where you can only consider what's presented to you, right? You do actually bring all this other stuff. And so, you know, it's not uncommon, I think, in meetings we were talking about some transport stuff to do with East Auckland a little while ago, and I was Googling some of the stats to find out, okay, I need to know a little bit more information about this. I've missed my chance to ask the question, so I'm going to do it this way. So there's lots of things, lots of inputs, and it's kind of up to individual elected members as to how they gather those inputs and how they seek them out as well. So, for me, I'm new to representing half of the ward, so I don't have as many connections here, and I'm trying to build them. But I know who I would tap. I would probably talk to Richard and about Puketāpapa stuff, because I've known him for years and I know that he knows the cycling issues there back to front. But I'm still building connections here, and I would hope also that because Richard and I have a relationship, if I was saying something stupid, he would let me know as well, which so far I think we're doing okay. Yeah, I got a thumbs up, so that's cool. So, it is a two-way street of building relationships, and people do need to sometimes tap us on the shoulder and go, hey, you didn't quite get that right. But I also need to build those relationships so they feel they can do that. Yeah, and that takes time and effort. Yeah. And it's also how available you are on social media as well. It can be very easy to get a lot of people giving you a single point of view. And at the moment, I don't know about your inbox, John, but we're full of people in particular telling us don't make the cuts in the art space. Lots and lots of emails about that. And it would be very easy to think that's the only view on offer. So you do have to sort of balance up the people who seek you out and advocate to you with knowing that, there's some other stuff going on here too. And that's hard to do, but we have to try. Sorry, I've gone on a bit.
Go for it if you'd like to.
I just quickly, I just really build on what Julie's saying there. Auckland is a really big place, and these wards that you represent are huge. So like the one I represent is about 190,000 people. So that's equivalent of like 3 parliamentary electorates for one person. So
2 people.
Two people, but you can end up, just
absolutely.
going doing the one. So listening is really important, and what you find even in your own backyard is that there's undercurrents or things happening that you're totally unaware of, and then it hits you and you think, my goodness me, that's what everyone's thinking, or that's their attitude to this. So even though you lived in a place all your life and you think you've got a handle on stuff, Auckland, parts of it are so new now. So my ward, and it's the wards are so different from each another. There's a totally different dynamic. So I like to think I've got a reasonable handle on the place, but often not. No, not really. And I physically can't because it's just so big. So that listening to people and trying to tap into what's going on is really important. And I think despite, the irony is that probably all of us recognise, despite all, the information sources and Facebook and that, there's probably less true listening, less clear articulation of ideas and less willingness to discuss than there ever was. So, we live in an era of tolerance, but in some ways, as this issue shows, there's actually less tolerance around now than there's ever been. And, that's a problem.
That's a perfect segue to my next topic. Thank you. It's almost like we rehearsed it. The state of the dialogue around cycling in Auckland. I'm keen to get your perceptions on this, the three of you. I thought I'd start with Adrian, particularly given you've come from another country, you've been working there for many years. Quite interested to hear how you would compare the dialogue in Auckland versus where you've come from, and if it's reflective of a stage of a journey and where you've come from, and where do you think this might head?
Cool. Unfortunately, I'd say it's business as usual. That I was working in Oxford last year, and Oxford has about 20% mode share for cycling in the city centre. Just about everybody rides a bike. There is hardly any private cars that enter the city centre now. There are quite bus services that run through it. They had a big rally a couple of weeks ago with people who were opposed to these kind of low traffic neighbourhoods that have been implemented mainly in some of the student areas where most of the kind of left-leaning people live who would naturally be supporters of these things. So it doesn't matter where you are, there is this kind of backlash that happens because people don't like change, and change is coming quite quickly with, you know, other things happening in their lives, and this is just one more thing on top, and it becomes a bit of a rallying point. So, you know, it kind of bashing cyclists is something that seems to happen the world over, and there's a book by Janet Sadiq Khan about how they introduced bike infrastructure into New York and into Manhattan in particular, and it's called Street Fight. And you know that is basically what happens. You know, that you have to battle the whole way, and so that is just business as usual. And I've done quite a bit of work over the years with the Dutch Cycling Embassy, which is a kind of consortium of consultants who work in the Netherlands, and they have pretty much the same discussions when it comes to car parks and everything else. So it doesn't matter where you are. It's hard work, and it's just change, and people naturally tend to be resistant to change.
I'm interested in the Oxford situation. I lived there before I came back here. We actually used our bikes so much that we sat down and looked at a map of Auckland to figure out where we could live that was flat enough for the kids and striking distance to the city so we could bike to work. And that was 12 years ago, and there was no animosity on the street around cycling, or LTNs didn't exist in popular imagination then, but there certainly wasn't people protesting. And we're far, I hope we never get to that point here in Auckland for people actually protesting change, but can you see some kind of progression from maybe a time in Oxford that's comparable to where we are maybe now in Auckland in our state of dialogue, and how that's kind of led to that point of on-street protest?
Sorry. Yeah, I think, as John said, that there is something to do with social media in all this, that a lot of people can get behind kind of sometimes quite minority views, but they kind of reflect their own feeling on the world, and suddenly that becomes more of a movement, whereas in years past the moment would pass and we would just all move on and carry on. So I think that is something that's really changed. One of the kind of tipping points that I've learned over the years, we started when it was about 2008, 2009, when Boris Johnson was elected in London, and we put in a lot of just painted cycleways. It was really just paint on the roads or sometimes bus lanes, and the impact of that, plus the Boris bikes, the hire bikes came on stream, was that cycling went up by about 200% within the year. And what was the result of that was that it then had a little bit more political capital, and people realised that, there are people cycling here, and they were visible on the street. And then the next sort of step along the progression is when you've kind of got 10% of mode share, suddenly everything becomes a lot easier, because a lot of people have got direct experience of cycling themselves. So, we've got some parts of Auckland where that is already the case, where certainly cycling to school is more than 10%, and the cycling to work, even from the 2018 census figures, is more than 10%. So there are certain neighbourhoods where we're in fertile ground, and as you well know, but there is much of Auckland that is nowhere near that, and we're at a different stage in the conversation in those neighbourhoods.
Thank you. And a similar question for, start with John. The state of dialogue around cycling in the city, but you two are quite different to us, in that you've got lots of different issues that you need to consider in your work. You've had a full day of meetings today where maybe cycling didn't even come up once.
No, it did.
It did come up once. I'm just interested, with all of the issues that you need to weigh and consider and make recommendations and decisions on, where do you put cycling and cycling infrastructure in terms of the heat in the dialogue compared to other things that are going on.
Yeah, cycling's right up there, and certainly, the last few years, it's for me anyway. My observation, it's one of those issues that is almost a convenient division of views that are proxy for other views too, almost. So if you from some part of the spectrum, then this is your attitude towards cycling. Irrespective, which like a lot of things isn't really the view of most people, and again, I think it comes back to that, the kind of the feeders into the vitriol, if you like, exacerbate what shouldn't be an issue, but cycling certainly is an issue. And I mentioned the story with the Upper Harbour. What I should have added as an after thought to that is Auckland Transport did, to their credit, did admit that hadn't handled things the best, and they did come back and consult, and that consultation is just it's concluded now, and hopefully it will be a compromise where there will be a barrier goes down. It will be, I'm hoping, I don't know because they're still to make up their mind, it will be a kind of more a rubberized type of barrier rather than these big concrete things that that demolish your car if you hit them, and that will have been a community that has kind of gone through the ringer, but will have listened and will have come to a compromise of a sort. But people, I hope, on both sides will have a sense that, well, actually, they have listened here, and this isn't maybe exactly what I want, but I can live with this, and it might be for the great, and in years to come, it could well be for the greater good. So, yeah, it's very topical, and certainly in my ward, I don't know about yours, Julie. It's always evokes very strong views.
I would say, cycling, I would agree with John, is a matter that does get a lot of heat and does serve as a proxy for some other views sometimes. And I think my observation would be that, you mentioned before issues about fear of change. And I think, Adrian, you mentioned bike-lash. And if anyone's interested, Dr. Kirsty Wild has done some really good research on bike-lash in the local context. And I think it does, it's interesting. We're thinking about the Upper Harbour example, and we'll have your barriers over in Albert-Eden-Puketāpapa. You can send them over our way, that'd be great. But I'm sure we could find maybe Great North Road. Anyway, let's push it out there a bit. But the heat that you get, sometimes what happens is that there's a lot of heat at the start, and then there's a compromise, but the compromise doesn't get reported. And so people are still angry about the thing they didn't like, and they either don't know or they don't move on from that to recognise that actually change did happen that you liked, and there was a compromise, and actually you can stop bagging us because we did listen. But people get stuck in that grievance mode, and that's not just a problem with cycling. That's a problem with a lot of different things in our society. And then people continue to feel very strongly. They continue to share that story, and it's actually not right anymore. And so how we see that with all the anti-vax stuff as well. How we debunk those things in a way that's friendly and gives people a chance to come back from that, is, I think, a matter we're facing in a whole lot of spaces. And cycling is probably actually a really good example where people decide, no, I'm in this camp, and not necessarily looking for or listening. And just to give an example of that, before the recent election, I went to a mayoral debate, and I went by bike. And afterwards, I was unchaining my bike with two other people who had also come by bike. And there was a woman there who had come by car, and that was fine. That suited her. And she had said at the meeting that nobody had come by bike. And we're standing there with our bikes going, well, we came by bike and we're right next to your car and you came after us, so you saw our bikes. So what didn't compute there, you know, that you could, no, because she utterly believed and said seriously, nobody came by bike. And then she said, well, you know, bicycles don't work for everyone. And I was like, yes, that's quite right. And she said, for example, women with 3 children. And I was standing in front of her saying, I am a woman with 3 children and I have come by bike. And she still couldn't compute that. And for me, that was really sad, actually, because here she had the very example that she was giving being debunked in front of her. And there are lots of women with 3 children who biking doesn't work for, but it's not universal. And it's just that sort of putting things in boxes stuff and how we help people to realise that the boxes actually aren't as hard and fast as they think they are. And, you know, I drive a car. Sometimes my plan was to drive a car here tonight and it didn't quite work out. But, you know, I catch the bus. I'm multimodal. Most people are multimodal, even if it's just walking and driving, right? But we don't. We say that cyclists, we for some reason tend to think only get round on their bicycles, and that's not the case. You know, everybody who's able walks at some period in their life, and everybody generally will at some point go in a car, whether they're a passenger or being driven. And so some of these divisions are quite artificial, and I think there's some power there in sharing our stories to show, you know, like as I say, my plan was to get here by car tonight. Well, I did come by car, but I came by taxi. I didn't drive. I will have used probably 3 different modes of transport by the time I get home, and that's not including walking. And that's, you know, that's okay. I'm a cyclist. I'm also a driver. I'm also a bus user frequently. And I'm also a walker. And I can't use electric scooters because I don't have good enough balance, but I would be if I could, you know. There's lots of different ways we can get around, and we're complex people with a mix of identities. We're not just one thing. And I think that's the sort of thing we need to, as a society, get better at recognising.
Thanks, Julie. Just wondering if any of you can recall a situation where you met someone who changed your mind when it came to any particular view on cycling. Any volunteers?
I'll kick it off. So I wrote the UK guidance in 2003, and at that time, most of the cycle campaigners campaigned for on-road cycling, what we call vehicular cycling in the kind of nerdy language of the time. And the reason was that the only option for off-road cycling at that time within the road corridor was shared footpaths. And nobody liked shared footpaths, neither cyclists nor pedestrians. And you had to stop at every side road because there was no way to give priority to cyclists over side roads. And there was not really anything but advanced stop lines as a way to kind of get through junctions. And there weren't really that many options for crossing the road. And when we started to, you know, there was kind of movement to do more cycle tracks, and I was quite against it because I just thought nobody's going to use this stuff, you know. And the argument of people at the time was, well, this is for beginners. And I said, well, you're only a beginner for a week, you know. After that, you're a cyclist and you'll go on the road, and we'll have wasted all our money on something that nobody uses. And you know, I've had my mind changed by, you know, it was about 2008 we started to build more off-road cycle infrastructure in the UK. And we had to change the rules. We had to review all the traffic signs, get some different regulations in so we could deal with priority intersections, so we could give people better choices when it came to crossings and so on. But once we'd done that, I was all for it, for doing segregated infrastructure, because the minute we started building it, loads of people started cycling, you know, and you go to central London now, and those tracks are really well used, whereas I'd spent 10, 15 years putting in paint on the road and not that many people ever used what we were building. So my mind's been changed, you know, in the last 10, 15 years, just through the experience of witnessing when you start building things of quality, people will use it.
If you don't mind, I'd be keen to drill into that change of mind a bit. Like, what was that a hard change for you to make? Like, were you resistant to changing your view on that? And also, what was it that was it an experience, a person, an event that kind of shifted your thinking on that?
So I used to write a blog, and it's probably still online somewhere, so you can quote from it and attack me. But I kind of wrote a long dialogue against this, because at the time, if you cycled around London, most people were on a road bike. Most people were under 40, and we'd just spent 2 or 3 years putting in these painted cycle lanes and bus lanes, and they've been quite successful, as I said, in getting more people cycling. But you know, I used to be a racing cyclist, and most people in London were cycling faster than me and passing me. And I said, these guys are never going to come to a junction and stop at the left-hand side of the road and go across the road in 2 stages when you can just keep up with the traffic and do it all in one. And, you know, it was that kind of practical experience of just watching how people behaved that has convinced me that, yeah, well, I can see in the Netherlands, where there's lots of kind of older people on bikes and women and children, it kind of works because people are cycling more slowly. But it was a bit like Auckland is at present. Most of the people you see tend to be young, or nowadays they've got e-bikes. The e-bikes didn't exist then. And so it was just my experience, my personal experience, that had kind of prejudiced my views against trying to do that in a UK context. But as I say, when I kind of went to the Netherlands, and then we went to Denmark, and we kind of saw Denmark is half and half. It's a bit Dutch, but there's quite a lot of on-road cycling as well. And I thought, oh, well, you know, maybe that could work here. And so then I thought, well, what does it need? What will it take? And then a few of us who kind of worked in different cities got together and started lobbying the government for the rules changes to make something that could work within the UK context. And it was that experience of thinking about how can we make this work within a UK context was the thing that just changed my mind. And then once we started building it and it actually did work, then that convinced me even more.
I was going to ask you a question, but did you want to go first?
I was just going to answer the question, but did you have a different question?
A more targeted one.
All right, then.
Yeah, because you gave us an example of somebody that you met at an event who was pretty firm in how they were thinking of the world. And you meet a lot of people in your role, and you need to develop nuanced and quite complicated ways of looking at the world. I'm just wondering, have you had an experience where you've met an individual that's kind of shaped your thinking on something a little bit differently than before you met them? And if you have, and it doesn't have to be cycling actually, it could be kind of union days, but yeah, like how did that change of mind play out for you? What was it about that moment, that person, or that subject that shaped that?
Well, actually, the 2 people are actually in the room who heavily influenced me around my thinking around cycling and changed my mind, which is Pippa Combe and Richard Barter. I always thought that cycling wasn't for me. I was happy to advocate for it for other people, but I didn't really understand it, and I did think it was probably mostly for your what we used to call mammals, your middle-aged men in lycra. And I just didn't really see it as an option. And then I was working with Richard, who was chair of the local board when I was first elected, and he just had such a generous attitude about it, which was very much, you know, just try it, you don't have to commit. And Pippa reinforced that and loaned me the Frocks on Bikes spare bike that they had. And I tried it out, and I ended up trying it out for a year, which was probably a little bit too long to borrow somebody else's bicycle. But it did really, I learnt actually it's not all about getting somewhere fast. That was the big thing for me, was that I was like, this is going to take too long. I don't have a level of fitness to do this. I'm going to be too vulnerable. It's not safe. And actually, both of them showed me just in really gentle, indirect ways that I could make it work for me and I could make it work for my life. And then having an e-bike has just been a total game changer, because that means I can go further and I can go that little bit faster. I don't go very fast. I get a bit scared if I go more than about 20 or 25. And I'm fine just pootling along at my own pace. I don't have to go super fast. I'm okay if people pass me. I'm all ready if someone tells me I'm cheating because I've got an e-bike to say yes and I'm winning. But it hasn't happened yet, which is a nice surprise. And it was just, honestly, Richard and Pippa's really generous approach to, hey, you don't have to do this all the time. You know, you can be multimodal, basically, what I talked about before, and that's how I've ended up in, and I'm a lot happier for it, because I actually find driving really frustrating. And you feel like you're supposed to be in control because you're driving a car, but actually, particularly depending on what time of the day you travel, you actually don't have much control of how fast you're going. And on a bicycle, you actually do have a bit more freedom and independence. And like, I was cycling home on Tuesday, and I saw some people in the park, and I thought, oh, I need to talk to that person. And so I just went and took my bike over and talked to them. I couldn't have done that in a car. I would have kept going. I possibly wouldn't have even seen them in the first place. So it has actually changed. It's slowed me down. It's made me more mindful. It's really good for my mental health. And that's something I'm trying to get across to my mum, who feels like it's really unsafe. And I'm like, but actually the balance for me is worth it, because I bike in a way that is safe, because people like Pippa and Richard and Emma McInnes as well, Nico Elson, they've shown me how to do it in a safe way that suits my lifestyle. Yeah.
And John, any examples from you, someone that's changed your mind on a topic to do with cycling?
No. I was trying to think of something to say. One of those questions, you should have a whole lot of good answers to say. The only thing that occurred to me was actually my dad. And he didn't so much change my mind as really influence my thinking, because we came over from Scotland, and where they came from in Scotland, there's only two ways of getting around, and one was hoofing it, was walking it, and the other was on a bike, and the bike then translated to a motorcycle, so that was it. And I followed that same progression, and although my mum and dad were quite strict in many respects, when it came to things like cycling, it was away you go. You just go cycle anywhere, go on a bike, get knocked off a bike, and it kind of, I wouldn't say it bred a fearlessness, but it bred a kind of awareness for a start, because you're the vulnerable party when you're out, so you're very, very, very watchful. And once you've been knocked off, you're even more watchful. I didn't get knocked off a cycle, but I got knocked off a motorcycle several times. So it just said, well, this is a very uneven contest. But what it did sort of teach me was that was to be very careful, but also to be quite daring and to, Adrian mentioned the shared pathway. So, when I get around, and I said that to you guys, that I go on the footpaths where I am, because there's no separate. So I've never been stopped by police. In fact, the police will wave at you as you go by. It's not on their list to do at all. But when I go from any particular area, I have my combination of the road as little as possible, the footpath, because there's no pedestrians. It's like your own separated cycleway. Anyway, where I live, there's people generally aren't walking, and if they are walking, you just shoot around the grass or something. So it was a kind of learning and experience that I think equipped me to go around what otherwise might be quite a dangerous cycling environment if I was going on the road, or if I was inexperienced. We had a guy come over from Britain, an older guy, was a Wayne Nurman, and he came off a biking, a very bad accident, but he'd picked it up late in life and sort of didn't have that awareness. Not that you sometimes have a choice, but certainly he didn't have. So I guess as far as that was the attitude of my father, which was just really, really encourage it, and it's fortunately it stayed with me all my life, and that's where I just like cycling. If I could, I'd cycle where to get to places, because I find that, like Julie, it's better for you mentally. But to be fair, where I am, big chunks of it, it's too much of a distance, and parts of the road are just too dangerous.
Thanks, John. I wonder if we can drill into a bit of a controversial topic, which is, do cycleways help or harm businesses? And I'm sure many people in the room would agree that it's not black and white. It's quite nuanced. And I'm just wondering if you've got any examples of people that you've met, and you don't have to name them or say where they're from, but more the conversations you've had with people that have shaped either side of that thinking in your mind. Any examples?
We had a speaker over this week from, a colleague of mine from the UK, but he lives in America now, but he's done endless research into this, and every case study that you look at where they've invested in walking and cycling, it's been beneficial to business. My own experience, I helped out in this area of northeast London called Waltham Forest, which is really famous, and there's a guy called John Little who kind of led a lot of that work, and I think he's been here. But one of the main proponents, one of the main opponents of that scheme was a guy who had a cafe along one of the streets that we were going to alter, and we weren't closing it to traffic, we were just taking away about a dozen car parks, and he was, this is going to be the end of my business. And he led the protest group, and I was working at the Department for Transport in central government, and we had the Dutch minister over to open this scheme, and the day that they were due to open the scheme, he'd organised a demonstration, and they were carrying a coffin down the street because it was going to be the death of businesses along that road. When the scheme went ahead, he was the first person to apply for a license for outdoor seating. His takings have now doubled or tripled. He's opened a second restaurant, and he's a big proponent for that scheme now, needless to say. Had the same experience in the northeast of England, in Newcastle, which is probably even hillier than Auckland, and definitely rainier and colder. And we were just doing, and again, a kind of minor change to the street. It was kind of Wynyard Quarter type stuff. It was an ironmonger this time, and he was again really against the scheme. It was kind of in a neighbourhood. It wasn't in the city centre, but again, big opponent, led all the opposition. His premises have now doubled in size, and and he said, I met him a couple of years ago, so I got that wrong, didn't I, Adrian? But we kind of, we had a lot of discussions with him about, where his customers going to park, all the usual stuff. They could park in the next street; it wasn't a big problem, but to him it was, this is going to be the death of my business. So there are numerous examples where all these fears don't come to pass, and it is generally a good thing for business. People always underestimate, and even in Auckland, you'll find that probably for every shopping centre that you care to mention, 60% of people won't be getting there by car. They'll be getting there on the bus. They'll be they'll be walking from nearby. And, people always forget that it's, it's maybe half at the most, but unless it's somewhere like Sylvia Park where it'll be more. But for most local centres, people always overestimate the reliance on car of the people who are using it.
I think those are good examples of other people changing their minds. I'd like to flip it for John and Julie about people that might have changed your view on that slightly controversial topic, or rounded it, or given it more nuance. And I can give you, just maybe as an example, am I still on?
Yep.
I was working on a project in the Waikato a couple of years ago where there was a strip of local businesses, and we were wanting to pilot a cycleway. And for a lot of the hospitality businesses and convenience businesses, they largely welcomed the change. The two businesses that were very worried about it was a tyre shop and a shop that had lots of customers coming to get baby car seats installed in their cars. And for them, their customers definitely came by car. And this idea that cycleways are good for all businesses was not true. And whether or not that was the right place for those businesses was another thing for discussion. But I'm just wondering if you've got examples of kind of more nuanced ways that you've come to think of this subject.
Can I give it back to you?
Yeah. In the spirit of listening, one of the obvious things that's just occurred to me, listen to Adrian as well, I think what I'll do now is go to some of these businesses that are around that have had cycleways and ask them, because I'm not sure that, we hear that and we hear another view, so there's nothing like going along and actually talking to people. That would be a good test. The only thing I would say, and it's a more generalised thing, is certainly in our ward there have been instances where there's been works going on. The works have taken so long, so not actually perhaps the finished product, but the actual putting together, the resurfacing and all of it has taken so long that the people have been disrupted. But that's not so much the product, it's just the way the project has been rolled out, and that definitely has been damaging to businesses. Yeah.
I would just add on that businesses do legitimately fear disruption that you're talking about, and I mean we've seen that in the city centre, a lot of disruption, and it's interesting too because often they think it's a council project or an Auckland Transport project, and it actually turns out it's a commercial building that's being built by somebody else. But they see road cones and it's council or it's Auckland Transport. So it's really interesting, that stuff around how people perceive works. That, and actually I had an example in Linfield, in Puketāpapa, where someone put some photos up on Facebook of this project that they said was a new cycle lane going in. And they'd blocked me on Facebook, so I didn't see it, and all these people kept tagging me going, what's this about? This new bike lane, this is outrageous. No one had consulted us. It wasn't a bike lane, it was a toilet that was going in, and they'd had to cone off part of the road to put the new toilet in, and there were going to be 3 toilets, we'd previously been 2. It was a good news story, right? But it was just that immediate, I see road cones on the road, therefore it must be a cycling project because that's what I don't like. And when we got to a good place with that, and I was able to share some information and say here's more about it and so on and so forth. But I had another example like that where somebody shared photos of a car park that was being done up in a park and said that we were putting parking meters in. And it was back when Len Brown was the mayor, and they were like, it's another money grab by the mayor and stuff. And I pointed out, actually, it's not. It's, we're not putting parking meters in. And they're like, well, I talked to someone who was working on the project, and they said, it's not even in the plan that you've done this by stealth. It's like, it's not in the plan because we're not doing it. Like, you can't prove a negative. And even though, like, at the time I was the local board chair, and I was saying, look, I swear to you, we're not doing this. And people still wouldn't accept it. So there's a real thing there about trust, and the fact that a lot of trust in our institutions, in our government agencies, and our politicians has been undermined over a generation now. Thinking back to, say, for example, Nixon, who's had this huge impact on our political culture, even though it's not even our country. There is still this perception that, our default setting is that we're not telling the truth, for example. And yet when we meet people face to face, it's a very different experience. So again, it's the complexity of human beings, the need to have connection and conversations and recognise that nobody is just one thing, I guess, is what I'm sort of coming back to and from this broader conversation. Yeah, I've gone a long way off topic there, sorry. Hopefully it's still useful.
Yeah, just a thing on the disruption. That is really valid point, and I used to run 3 bike shops in my youth, in my 20s, and it wasn't a cycling scheme. They were building a tram system, and yeah, we had 18 months of disruption outside one of our shops, and it killed us. You know, we were given a little bit of compensation, but it was nowhere near the loss of sales that we experienced, and that is a real problem for business. And we also, as roading authorities, we put a lot of money and a lot of time into consultation before the scheme, but it's also really important to manage that relationship during the time that you're building things, because that is the toughest time for the people who are directly affected, and we don't always do that.
How does that experience shape your approach to your conversations with businesses?
Well, I guess having been at the sharp end, on the receiving end of some of this stuff, we probably have a bit more empathy with the situation. But the other thing I meant to say actually is that the nature of places can change as well. So it's a city called Leicester in the UK, and they've steadily increased the kind of central area where there are restrictions on motor traffic, and on the edge of the city centre there tends to be a lot of kind of takeaways and op shops and that kind of thing, you know, people who have fairly low rent. And of course one of the upshots of doing the work and making it better for walking and cycling is you get more people into the area, but then the rents go up and some of those businesses get forced out, and you get the sort of gentrification effect. And whilst that might be great for the overall economy, it's not so good for those individuals, because they've got to find somewhere else, or, you know, they go out of business because they can't afford the rent. And I've also experienced that in one of our other shops in Leeds, where McDonald's moved across the road, and suddenly from being in a kind of bit of a backwater, we suddenly had loads of people pass the door, and the landlords put the rent up a year later. You know, so I kind of I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for businesses who are inadvertently adversely affected because actually things get better for the rest of us.
Quick fire time before we stop for questions. I've got 3 here, and I think for the councillors. So in your role, I should wear my glasses. What's the one thing the wider community, so Aucklanders, could do to help you broaden or deepen your understanding of cycling and cycleways when you need to make decisions or recommendations about things? So what's the one thing the Auckland community could do to help you broaden your thinking or deepen it?
I think invite me to come and have a look, to actually, walk the street. You get a different perspective on it than you do in meetings and from plans and consultation materials. And so, come for a walk with me and talk to me about what you're worried about, whether that's, I really want this project to go ahead, or I'm really worried about this, that and the other. Because sometimes I'm not going to have an answer, but I can sort of squirrel that away, and sometimes months later I'll be like, oh, hang on a second, there was that thing, and I should connect this person up with that person, and often it's connections between people that actually makes change. And so invite me to come and have a walk. Don't invite me to go on my bike, because I get embarrassed cycling with other people. So I'm quite a shy cyclist. You might have picked that up.
That's a really good point. It's remarkable the number of things in the council, big multi-million-dollar projects where it's all done off paper. So you're sitting in that town hall and you're looking at things, and for me, I have to go and see things to get a bit of understanding. So certainly going out to somewhere and looking at the route or talking to people and both sides, then at least you've got some semblance of understanding. And unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, that doesn't necessarily always happen. Most times it doesn't.
Can I just add to that? John pointed out we cover a lot of people. We also, in some cases, cover quite huge geographic areas. Not so bad, probably for me or say Waiheke, where the elected representatives know the areas quite well because they're relatively small. But I think about our colleagues who cover Rodney and Franklin. That it's just not possible to know every street. And I remember there's a dairy that I go past. In theory and in time, there will either be a bus lane or a cycle lane or both along that street because it's an arterial road. And it wasn't until I went past on my bike that I actually, having driven past it and been past it on the bus, it wasn't until I went past on my bike that I actually noticed, you're quite a long way from any side streets for parking. And so actually you probably would be quite adversely affected if you lost your on-street parking. And there's a discussion to be had there about how much weight do we give that in the decisions we make about the road corridor. But that, in this case, it isn't a simple answer of going, well, actually, you can just use the side street. And I noticed that from my bike. I stop there sometimes, and I always make sure I wear my bike helmet when I go inside to buy something so they know I got there by bike, because it's a lot easier to count cars in car park and to count car parking spaces than it is to actually count people who are coming by other ways.
Thank you. And I'm going to combine the last two questions because they're kind of two sides of the one coin. There are advocates for cycling infrastructure rollout in this room. There are people that are concerned about change. What would be some advice or some examples that you could give them to listen to each other, to meet together, to talk together, to develop their own shared understanding a little bit better, so that when people are coming to you in the roles that you have, you're hearing a little bit of not commonality or not agreement, but a little bit more nuance from people rather than something being black and white. So yeah, some insights, ideas, or examples you've seen before of that working. Who would like to go first?
Yeah, I mean, obviously events like this are really helpful because it does give us the chance to talk in a not pressured environment that is, not related to a particular scheme. When I was writing some of the guidance, we had a panel of people from, freight organisations, disability organisations, the cycling advocacy and the walking advocacy groups and so on. And we used to kind of workshop ideas with them, but I was talking to somebody from the National Federation for the Blind afterwards, after the kind of official workshop, and he's just said, well, in these discussions, Adrian, said, before I was blind, I used to ride a bike, but in these discussions, I always have to take the extreme view because I know that whatever I say, you're going to negotiate it down. And so he saw the entire conversation as a negotiation. And so he was never going to back on, he was never going to relax on any point. And so it's really helpful if you can kind of have some of those more offline conversations where something isn't actually at stake, where you can kind of get to know each other and get to know, well, what are some of the problems that people might not want to say in a public meeting where it's about a specific scheme and there's a lot of things at stake. So this kind of event is really helpful for that.
Would either of you like to give one?
Yeah, just quickly. My wife lived in Japan for a year and had a little girl with her, and of course over in Japan, most of the cities, it's about 16% mode share, if not more in some places, and has got more during COVID-19, and she wasn't a cyclist, but she was when she was living in Japan. Everywhere she went to and had a little seat on the back for a little kid. And so one of the things I'm quite interested in, and I know my colleague Wayne Walker is too, is kind of practical gains. In Japan, they don't actually have that much separated bike infrastructure. That they have divisions down the sidewalk or the footpaths. So one of the things I'm genuinely interested in trying to find out, because I feel a little bit, don't say that, is what are the practical things that can happen? When I come over here, I see lovely big paths that sort of make, ours look like sort of acrobats, little, things in the gymnastics. What are the practical gains that can be made that make cycling better? And I'm thinking particularly in the outer suburbs, which is the big chunk of Auckland population-wise, that can build on infrastructure that's already there and perhaps not even used. And as I said, I feel a bit reticent saying that, because often that's suboptimal and it's not this and not that. But I'm kind of looking for practical gains and listening to what people have got to say, as opposed to just sort of focusing on some odd projects that become very controversial and get everyone going, whereas actually there should be a lot more happening just as a matter of course that doesn't cause any controversy, practical, and people can see the benefit of it. So I want to hear about that.
Can you see a way where that would be, like thinking of your ward?
Yeah.
Can you see a way where you could have people from your ward come together with different views on that might come up with some solutions that are different from what AT or consultants or experts might deliver? And how could you go about kind of creating that type of situation?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And we have some very keen cycling advocates up where we are too, but not there's kind of more barriers. So I think it's just a matter of bringing people together, and often I think AT. I don't want to put on poor old AT. They have a lot to do, but they could be the catalyst for that sort of thing, and I think they would have the buy-in from the political people just as a starter, and come up with an idea that we can put out what we see as the issues, and the advocates can say, well, actually, we need a bit more, whatever, and I'm sure you could come up with something that's a quantum improvement in what there is, and in some ways has no controversy to it at all, and might have aspects where there has to be something that's definitely the subject of a degree of consultation and planning. The rest of it, a lot of it could just happen in a very practical sense using local knowledge. And again, I don't like to keep harking back to where we live, but we have these big shared paths going through reserves that are on flat, that have natural connections that very few people know anything about. So it wouldn't take too much to have a quantum improvement in what we've got with that kind of cooperation.
Okay.
Councillor Watson said last week, why don't we just try it out? Just cone off the road for a bit, see if it works, do a trial. And that's another good way, when you've got these hard decisions to make and you're worried about the consequences, it's a really valid thing to do. You need to make that trial last for a few weeks so people get used to it, because everyone crashes in the first week. But once people kind of get used to a different layout, it can be really helpful to sort of prove the concept or prove that you got it wrong. And if it's just temporary infrastructure, you can move it around and try something else. So that's another way that you can kind of reach some kind of compromise and consensus.
If I could just add, I think some of that comes back to managing expectations, and something I've been trying to push within council for a little while is that we get better at when we engage, telling people what the likely outcome is, so we don't give people an expectation that they can influence things they can't influence, because there might be legal reasons, or there's a budget or whatever, And so we pitch it at the right level. So we're saying, actually, we're just telling you about this. We're putting some yellow lines in here because we've got an issue with sight lines, and so there's some broken yellow lines going in, and we'll talk to the people who are directly their properties are right there, because they might be aware of something we don't know, but actually we're just informing you, as opposed to we want your input because this is actually a full consultation process, or even we're empowering you to pick from these options and we will carry out whichever option you pick. Those are actually different parts of the spectrum. And so there's a lot of work we could do better, I think, with the community to manage that and to be clearer about what you're going into when you're giving a view. In terms of an idea that could really help, I think, people to talk to each other, it actually, for me, goes back to whakawhanaungatanga and actually sharing stories, connecting about your lives, and that will always help people to find something they have in common. And that can be a really good basis to start from. And it might have nothing to do with the project you're there to talk about. But, and I know we all feel a bit cringy about icebreaker exercises, but often they do help you to make that connection with someone. And you go, I like going there for holiday too. And, have you been to the ice cream shop? And isn't the fish and chips great? And, and it just means you're interacting with someone as a human being, as opposed to perhaps as a stereotype. So that's something I'd like to see us get better at and do more.
Thank you. So we're going to move to questions in a second, but anything left unsaid from any of you that you'd like to have 30 seconds to say before we open for questions? John, you look like you've definitely got something.
No.
Adrian, anything left unsaid for you?
No. Let other people speak for them.
Okay. Have we got questions on the document from the online audience? Could you? No? Okay, that makes... Right, down in front here, who's got a microphone for the audience? Oh, we need it for the online stream. Down the front, Fionn.
Kia ora, thank you very much. This is an awesome event. Thanks for pulling it together. And some really honest kōrero here. I'm going for a 2-for-1 question, so it's for two people but one question. It's in the spirit of dialogue. And for Adrian and for John. And I suppose it's sort of topical as well. So I'm really curious with the Great North Road improvement plans, upgrades there. And so there's been, there's resounding support from what I can understand, 7 schools behind it and so on, and residents associations, and it's funded and so on. So I'm kind of curious, what does it take to make something like this happen when you've got so much support or for the engagements there? Is there, what are the next things that kind of need to happen? Yeah. Who wants to go first?
Well, I can give you an answer from the council perspective. So there was the meeting a week or so ago, and what was resolved from that was that the council would have a site visit, so that.
Certainly didn't cover itself in glory with the horrendous scene.
I thought there was going to be a review of me. It wasn't sounding too good. So in some ways we're picking up on some of the suggestions here. So people are going to go to a site visit. A number of people are going to bike it, but everyone who wants to is going to go there, and they're going to be Auckland Transport, and to their credit too, have invited feedback from the councillors, but not in the for or against it. It's people will submit their own feedback, and obviously in the instance there, and I haven't been the route, so I'm waiting till I go along. Part of what informs that is the level of support and cycling activity in that community, because as I said at the outset, Auckland's a very different place, and it's pretty clear, and that comes from listening. There are parts of Auckland that have a stronger biking culture or presence than others, but ultimately we're going to go along and have a look and see what we're dealing with, and that should be a more informed feedback, but ultimately it'll be the Auckland Transport Board who make that decision.
Yeah, and just from the Auckland Transport point of view, we've been through a process. You know, these things were ready to go for procurement for construction, but we felt last summer that it wasn't fair on whoever was going to be the newly elected mayor and council to kind of push them through at the last minute before the election, which was when they were ready to go. And so since the new administration came in, we've been back to the two local, well, to Waitemata local board in the case of Great North Road. We had a workshop with them. We went through a formal business meeting with them to get their formal approval. We also did an internal workshop with our board members, and we all did a site visit so that they were comfortable, that they knew what the scheme was all about. And the next step is to get that feedback from council so that we've just got a bit more evidence base of how different members of council feel about it. And then it will go for a decision at the May board meeting, because we don't have a meeting in April. So, you know, all that we ask of our local board is that they weigh the evidence before them, and of our AT board, is that they just weigh the evidence that we provide and make their wise decision. So, you know, which is what they're there for as a governance body.
Question in the middle. Oops, sorry, front. So already going in the middle.
I'm not going to stand. So it sounds like a lot of this is around listening, not just how we talk about cycling, but how do we listen about cycling. When I hear people against cycleways or wanting to take out the separators on Upper Harbour Drive, I personally freeze. I sort of feel like I'm a threat, like this person doesn't actually care whether I get to my destination alive. And I'll either stop that, sort of just kind of write that person off in my mind, or not say anything. So one thing that I want to do is role play with friends, those kinds of conversations, to practice like being really, really curious and kind of taking a moment to, I guess, let go of that fear response and try and hear what that other person's underlying concerns are. I was wondering, what might you do in your role to help the people who, I guess, and other people who you listen to and work with, your constituents, to learn and practice listening to each other? And specifically, is there one thing that you might do differently, or that either personally or in your role, to help people to do that?
Who would like to take that one?
I think it's a really useful way of framing it, the freezing stuff, because, and this is something I learned in my union work, is that when people are stressed, they often go back to fight or freeze or flee. And my observation has been that there tends to be a gendered response to that too. Men are more likely to fight, women are more likely to freeze. I mean, that's just a generalisation, and a lot of it's to do with socialisation, but that's been my observation, and as a woman I've found myself sometimes certainly freezing and not fighting, and I've had to learn. So I practice hard conversations in the shower. So so if no, thanks Wayne, you had to make it weird. So in the I thought, you know, I used to do it when I was driving as well, but I don't drive so much now, so yeah. But also for me, I'm in a house with 3 children, so finding somewhere private is important. I think that idea of recognising when someone else is freezing and sort of anticipating that, actually, I think you probably haven't finished talking, So I'm going to ask you a question to draw that out. I often do like to ask people questions when I don't necessarily understand where they're coming from to understand it better. But yeah, I could definitely get better at recognising when I need to ask a question to draw them out and to understand, rather than going, okay, you've obviously finished talking to me, I'll move on, or whatever. Checking in, was there something else you wanted to say? Matt's, do we want to say anything else for 30 seconds? That's a really good technique, actually. So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, good question. You mentioned Upper Harbour Drive and having a sense of awareness of people that felt vulnerable. I guess in the first instance, the people I did get attacked too online, and they were generally from people who were kind of pro cyclist. That's what I took them to be anyway, and it was pretty clear to me that they actually weren't familiar with the actual route itself, and the people who were fearful, and you might find this hard to believe, but were actually a lot of the local residents who travel across along that road. So there's a number of very near head-on crashes that nearly occurred. In fact, the young woman who ended up leading the kind of community advocacy group, the reason she got involved was because she, one of the cars banged into the barriers, came across the line, and nearly took her out. So the kind of irony was that in this instance, and the first person was an accident was a cyclist because of lack of safety equipment. This poor guy smashed his collarbone, and he was an avid cyclist. And that was on the first day they were up because of shortcomings. So I must admit that the empathy at that point, ironically enough, was for people who were having some quite distressing experiences from being motorists or local residents. And what made it a bit harder was that the crash data for the road for the last 3 years with NZTA, that there'd been one crash with a cyclist, and that was it. So what people saw was there was a solution being created for a problem that didn't actually exist. But what I must admit is that obviously there are people there who gain a sense of comfort. I mean, a number of the cyclists felt a bit compromised in that they couldn't pass in the way they normally did because there wasn't room to get by, and they were held up by the slow people, etc. But what we certainly needed to do, and we haven't necessarily done that, is that there's a group of people who in the community, and it wasn't necessarily Greenhive because that was quite a strong unified voice, but people who do feel vulnerable, and these were seen as important. So yeah, there was listening to that, but I must admit our listening in that sense was a number of these incidents that just kept occurring with people of all ages, and that were coming as a consequence of this intervention. Yeah.
Got time for a couple more. Got a question down the front here.
I think one of the thanks for tonight. It's been awesome. I think one of the challenges in this area is the tension between having experts like AT knowing what is best and the types of consultation that you do. And one of the things I hear a lot is, well, I hear both sides. Obviously, Upper Harbour side, they didn't do enough consultation. But then you hear in other areas, why are they asking us again? Surely AT are the experts. They know the right way to do it. Why don't they just get ahead and do it? And I'm just wondering if you had any lessons from how to balance that tension between consultation, and I think what you're suggesting, Julie, in terms of making the actual point of the consultation clearer is excellent, because I agree it's often very unclear. How do we solve this?
Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to labour Upper Harbour, but when we went back to the community, we had a couple of workshops, and people came angry, and once we kind of got past the first half hour and they'd shouted at me for half an hour, then we got into kind of some of the what might the solutions be, what might what whether they fit, and they were as John says, they were fearful because if you lose control of your car, it's not going to end well if someone's coming in the other direction. and we have to, create a situation that's safe for everybody, not just for cyclists. But when we reconsulted, and during that discussion, we set some very clear boundaries and said, look, we have to do something because this is a road where people are travelling at speed, and we have to provide some kind of protection for the cyclists who are there, because that is what our design manual tells us. That is what all international good practice tells us. So we can't just rip it all out. That was our ground point, and it was really important to set those boundaries. Sometimes in consultation, and particularly in the past, we just used to kind of create a referendum every time, was, do you like this or not? And, it's never a good question to ask, because it doesn't give people the opportunity to tell us what they like and what they don't like. And also, in every consultation, we generally only hear from the people who don't want it to happen, because they're the ones who are adversely affected by it. And the people who like it don't bother to participate. So, we've got to be really careful about setting the ground rules and what we ask, and ask intelligent questions during that consultation, and that in turn will get you towards the right solutions. And people need to feel that they have got a stake in it as well, that they can influence something. And one of the issues that I have with not just Upper Harbour Drive, but the assumption that was made about that particular programme was there are already some cycle lanes. If we just put some concrete separators on top, that's not really changing the road. But to everybody else outside AT, they don't think that. They think you are changing the road, because you kind of, that bit that we used to be able to pull into if the fire engine was coming behind us isn't available anymore. And, it's just kind of being intelligent and thinking about all the different angles before you go into that consultation, so you can ask the right questions.
I think there's a role there for the balance of expertise versus local knowledge. And I think that's actually where the local board model has been really valuable, because often local boards are well connected to their communities, and they are able to make connections, bring people into a conversation who have that local knowledge that can then be sort of balanced with the expertise. So I've seen that happen sometimes quite successfully, and other times not so well. But it's certainly better than not having it there in the first place. I had a bit of an aha moment about Upper Harbour Drive just now. So I know I haven't got a solution, but I've just got an observation. So Ricky mentioned in my introduction I grew up on the North Shore, and I did. And I actually did a project on Upper Harbour Drive and how unsafe it was back in probably the late 80s, early 90s. And at that time it was considered to be a really super dangerous road, and it was high speed. And I had some familiarity with it. I had a friend who lived on the road and stuff, and I went and took some photos of speed signs. And I just wonder if that was actually part of the problem with this particular project, is that knowledge and that culture of having known this was a dangerous road for years, and then it got massively improved and it was so much better, but there was still that underlying, hey, this used to be really dangerous and unsafe, and that kind of perhaps informed some of the reactions that people were having. I don't know, but I just sort of thought I'd throw that in there in terms of the conversation you have about a road is often really influenced by its history as well. And sometimes if we're a new player to that, we don't necessarily know that and acknowledge that that's where, for example, particularly in Greenhithe, they used to feel very isolated, because the road really cut them off a lot because it was so dangerous. And now it's a lot easier for them to get in and out. Anyway, just a thought.
No, you're dead right. That was the history of that road. There was numbers of fatalities, and that, and people, and often in any given area, people have lived there a long while, and that was part of the institutional memory. People say you just spent all that money making the roads safer and doing this and doing that and doing the next thing, and and now we've 40 crashes inside a couple of months. You think, what are you doing? I was just going to quickly say about the consultation, and listening to Adrian is really quite uplifting, because I don't know about you guys, but certainly where Wayne and I are from, there's a lot of cynicism about consultation, and that's a bit of a problem. That's consulted to death, and basically what you hear from people is they've made up their mind, they're not listening to us, whereas actual true consultation, where you do have people that have got skilled and they bring people along, and it is a real skill, is a totally different kettle of fish. But at Auckland Council, I think our track record hasn't been too inspiring over the years, and you are combating that cynicism, which makes it harder for Auckland Transport. But certainly people in the community are no fools. They know if people are listening to them or not. They sum people up pretty quickly, and then actions speak louder than words. So I think the council and everyone attached to it's got a bit to learn in that respect.
Sorry, I just have one more comment. Sorry. I'm trying to balance it up because it's 3 men and 1 woman, you see. So I had the experience of running what turned out to be a public meeting, but was originally just going to be a drop-in session for about 100 angry people over a bus route, Carlton Street, in Hillsborough, which now has the 68 running along it. And there were a number of mistakes made with that project and the way that it was done, but it's actually turned out fine, and a number of people have said, actually, yeah, we were worried, and actually it turned out to be okay. So, yay. And it also gave a whole lot of people who previously had no access to the public transport system, it brought them into a walkable catchment, which was fantastic. But at that meeting, AT had turned up expecting there to be people just dropping in and out, and they'd look at maps on tables and they'd all have civil conversations. And that wasn't at all what the community wanted. They did want to have some people to yell at and to be able to ask questions and make points and stuff like that. And that's okay. It needed to be accommodated. And so I kind of had to step up and run that. And it was 2 hours of really intense facilitation, and I pulled on a lot of my union skills because we had the AT people who were largely in the technical space, and I would have to translate between what they were giving as an answer, and I didn't necessarily have all the technical knowledge to really do that very well. But, I could ask them a question and say, well, I think, that's, what does that jargon actually mean, and stuff like that. And so there is a real role here for community leaders, not necessarily elected members, but other people who can bridge the gap. And that, for me, was actually quite a formative experience, because it gave me a lot more confidence that I can do that stuff. And the feedback from people afterwards was quite positive about my role. They still didn't like AT very much, but a number of people did say, actually, I hadn't realised this about the project, or I hadn't realised that about the project, because of the facilitation. I'm not sort of trying to blow my own trumpet here. What I'm trying to say is we actually need to acknowledge those skills, and we need to put them into the consultation processes quite consciously, and not expect people who don't have those skills to front things that they're frankly not really able to front in a way that's going to succeed. And sometimes it won't be an elected member like John or I. It'll be like in our Pacifica community. I'm thinking about Pete and Tilly would be the right people to front a conversation like that with the community, not me, because they'd be able to break it down in a way that made sense and got through to people. Where, no offence to AT's people who have amazing technical expertise, but often like their first answer would be that they were scared, which was fair enough, and they'd go to a technical place and they'd use jargon, and then I'd have to say, okay, so what does that actually mean in terms of the speed on the road or the height of the speed bumps or things like that? And they would explain it much better the second time, but the first time, coming from a place of I don't want to get this wrong, I'm going to go back to what I know, wasn't as productive. So yeah, I just wanted to say I think that's something we often underinvest in. Is the people who actually have those comms skills to lead the conversations.
Yeah, I would say one thing from that I'll try much. But we were sat around the table, and the lady next to me said, our AT person describing the schemes, he kept talking about traffic calming, and this lady said, "What's he on about? What's traffic calming?" Because of course, why would you know what that means? Yeah. You know, I said, "Oh, he means slowing the cars." Well, why doesn't he say that? You know?
And I would just say to stand up for the integrity of my ward here, the level of public responsiveness deteriorates as you go further north. Greenhithe people are pretty civilised by the time you get up. One of the worst, appalling examples of behaviour I've seen when poor AT personnel turned up to this consultation on Whangaparao Road, and the behaviour of some of these clowns at this meeting was just abysmal. And the irony was the AT people were absolutely 100% right in everything they were saying, and they were very decent, civil, kind of mild-mannered people. And what they had to put up on that day was just abysmal. But but Julie is right that in audiences like that, and it's not me, I'm not going to be putting my hand up to go in front of that mob either. You do need people with a degree of skill, and it can be quite a different outcome. But it's like throwing lambs to the wall. I wish the audiences were all like this. I'm assuming I'm going to get out okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to look at...
On that note, I've got a question for any of the panellists, including the moderator.
Just 1 second. Ricky, I know we're quarter of an hour over time, and the panellists are going to be sticking around. So, Ricky, what would you like to do with timing?
Maybe let's make that the last question.
Okay, final question. Thank you.
Quite prompt. If we have light rail, how might that integrate with cycling in kind of nearby areas of Auckland?
Okay, Julie. Thank you.
So one of the issues with light rail is going to be that it's going to create a frequent transport spine, and so how people connect to that through a range of other modes, like feeder buses, as well as coming by bike or walking, other active transport modes, that's going to have to basically be redesigned so that people can connect. Whether or not people are able to actually take their bikes on those on the trams, we don't know yet, and I know that is an issue with trains, and it's particularly an issue when we have rail replacement buses, because you definitely can't take it on a bus. So it's certainly something I've been asking AT about in the rail replacement, and I've said to them, look, can we pilot some stuff while we're doing the rail network rebuild that we could then potentially roll out in other places, like saying, hey, if you turn up for the 8:32 train and it's a bus, we're actually going to put on a truck that you can put your bike on, and then you can, we could try some things like that, and then we can learn from those to potentially influence some of the light rail stuff as well.
Thanks, Julie. So I think we'll leave it there. As said, I don't think we're locked in, but some of us will be staying around for some conversations. Just before I hand over to Ricky to close us out, I'd just like to thank Adrian, John and Julie for not only your insight and sharing your experiences, but also some personal reflections that, the hearing about your shops over in England that were shut down because of some transport works was very interesting. And I look forward to catching up with you all after the event, and also with all of you. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, everybody. I think it was a great evening. Thanks to our panelists, Julie, John, and Adrian, and thanks to Matt for hosting us here and asking the questions and moderating that fabulously. Obviously, we had a very great audience here who behaved, other than at Upper Harbour Highway. So thanks for that, and please stick around. We still have nibbles to eat, and even more, we had the kind donation of fresh bread that would have gone to waste if it hadn't come here tonight. And we're happy to give that away for koha. So we have koha boxes for the bread, or if you're happy to contribute to our nibbles. A great takeaway for me tonight was I learned the word backlash. I haven't heard that before, so thank you for that. I think what I take away is you have to keep asking and you have to keep listening, which is true for all wakes of life. Quick and cheap usually goes wrong. So I guess we have to be patient, is the lesson from that. And connection with people make change. Truly a great word. And I think let's have that connection and that conversation now in a more individual and private kind of way with having some food. I'd like to close the official part of tonight with a closing karakia. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te aio, te aroha, me te marutau, tihei Māori ora. May peace, love and safety be upon us all. Kia ora.